Go. Welcome, everybody. This is Rafa once again with Mystic Times. Thank you so much for being there. Today, we have the great pleasure of having the one and only Andrew Collins on the show. We're going to talk a little bit about Egypt and who knows, maybe what else comes up. So, hello, Andrew. How are you?
Hello, Rafa. Yes, I'm fine. Thank you. Coming to you from the UK. Nice weather outside. Yeah, raring to go.
Beautiful. So just a fair warning, my cat is outside and she might try to come in, and I have a window right in front of me. So if at any point you see me a little bit distracted, it's because she's here, and I'll see what I can do, if I can push her out or bring her in and she can say hi. So you mentioned on our conversations, via email, that you are writing, or you've already written a book about the Egypt's first female pharaoh. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's just released at this time. So yeah, I mean, it's called the first female pharaoh, Sobekneferu, goddess of the seven stars. And yeah, I mean, it's about, well, as it says on the cover, obviously, that the first female pharaoh. I mean, most people are aware of wonderful women of ancient Egypt like Nefertiti, Cleopatra, who's obviously been in the news a lot recently with a new Netflix series, and also, of course, Hatshepsut, who was an 18th dynasty female ruler. But nobody really knows that these were preceded by a woman who rose to become literally the king of Upper and Lower Egypt for a period of 4 years. At the end of the Middle Kingdom, in particular the 12th dynasty, and her name was Sobekneferu. Sobek was the crocodile god, a very, very ancient deity of Egypt. And Neferu means beauty. So she was the beauties of the crocodile god Sobek. And the reason why she's so important is not only because all of these later female pharaohs took their inspiration from her in some way, particularly Hatshepsut, but she saved Egypt, literally. She saved Egypt from total annihilation just prior to a dark age that we know as the Second Intermediate Period, where these Asian warlords came in and took over the northern part of the country. Their name were the Hyksos, and they trashed the rest of the country. But they did leave in a dynasty which had actually been founded, it seems, by Sobekneferu herself. And what happens was that she passed on the baton of sovereignty to them, having changed the policies in the country, because was Amenemhet IV. She had almost certainly ruled alongside him. And hello, sorry, I lost you then.
Yeah, I'm back.
Hello.
My connection is kind of unstable, but just keep going. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll just backtrack a little bit, and you can edit. Yeah. Because before she came to the throne, her brother Amenemhet IV ruled the country, and he had a completely open borders policy where he was allowing a lot of people coming in from the Levant, sort of places like Palestine, Israel, and Syria today, to enter into the country. And, they were self and trying to create a new kingdom outside of Egypt in what is today the Sinai, particularly around a religious center known as Serabat el-Qadam. And what was happening is that a lot of people who were into Egypt and keeping the sovereignty realized that this policy by her brother was going to lead the country into a state where it was going to become extremely weak and it could become vulnerable to being taken over by people coming in from the Levant. And this is exactly what did happen a couple of generations later. These Hyksos white warlords came in and took over the whole of the country. But what happened was that I think that factions came to Sobekneferu, who would seem to have been ruling, maybe unofficially, maybe officially, with her brother, and said, look, your brother is pulling the country in the wrong direction, and it can only spell disaster. We will support you as the sole ruler of the country if you change the policies back to much more one where the borders are not open to everybody, and basically that means your brother has to be taken out. And that I think that she agreed to this, and I think that her brother was then murdered, and that she took over for a period of 4 years and ruled the country officially as the first ever female pharaoh, the first ever ruler of the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt. And she changed everything. She changed the border policies. She stopped a lot of trading outside of Egypt. And she created this next dynasty, the 13th dynasty, which continued on virtually in her name, literally. They deified her. They venerated the same god as her, which was Sobek. And they carried forward her name. And what happened was that their descendants rose up eventually against these Hyksos warlords and drove them out of the country, beginning what we know today as the New Kingdom, which started with the 18th dynasty, where you have all the great kings like Tutankhamun, Tutmosis, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, and then the next dynasty after that, the 19th that followed it, you have all the Ramesses and everything. So in other words, the high point of the ancient Egyptian empire would then follow. But without her, Sobekneferu's brother, being taken out, I think that all of this would not have happened, that the country would indeed have fallen. That's why her reign is so important. And if Egypt had fallen and it just became, let's say, another vassal state of Canaan, then I think the world in which we're in now would be a completely different place. Now, whether this would be for the better or the worse, we can't say, but it would certainly be different.
So we're talking more or less what period in time?
This is 1800 BC. That's when she ruled. So, as I said, this is the end of what's known as the Middle Kingdom of Egyptian history, which had been a very, very successful period. Her father had ruled before her brother. His name was Amenemhet III. He was incredibly successful pharaoh. He'd ruled for, I think, nearly 5 decades. And as I said, after that, he left the country in the hands of his son, Amenemhet IV. And, he seems to have been very young, possibly no more than 16 to 18. And I think he was heavily influenced by the people around him. She may well have been slightly older, but she was overlooked, because he was male. And, people thought that everything would be okay, but it looks very much as if he was pulling the country in the wrong direction. And as I said, these fears, were true, because the country did fall into the hands of the Hyksos warlords within just a matter of a couple of generations. So, any fears that the people had that this was heading Egypt in the wrong way were absolutely correct.
And 2 questions: where were these warlords coming from?
They came in from what is today probably the Palestinian territories, places like the Sumerian hills, Nablus, obviously a place that is very much in the news at the moment. with the Arab-Israeli conflicts there, or maybe even further north in Syria.
So this was clearly a kind of invasion, but more from a political side, like the
It was an
allowance
invasion.
of an inflow of people from outside that kind
Yeah,
of
it
generated
was.
an imbalance, right?
Yes, it did. Yeah, I mean, this had been going. This was going on even before her brother took over. Her father
Mm.
had an open borders policy as well, and it all seemed to be going okay. You know, people were coming in. They were taking part in the army, the navy. They were involved in engineering projects, but very gradually they became a lot more influential within the the government of Egypt, quite literally, the royal court, right up to and possibly including the vizier of Egypt. In other words, the person who was the number two in control of the whole country. And what's so interesting is that this period parallels events in the Bible associated with Joseph. Now, Joseph, according to the biblical account, is the person who was he was the son of Jacob. His brothers abandoned him, and he was eventually taken into slavery into Egypt, and he became a servant in the household of a high priest of Heliopolis, which is called On in the book, which is the place of the cult of Ra, the sun god. And what happened was that eventually he's put in prison, but he gains this reputation of being able to interpret dreams. And the Pharaoh has this strange dream about these 7 fat cows and 7 very thin cows, and calls for Joseph to interpret them. And basically, Joseph says, "Look, the fat cows are, representative of, the fact that you have got to, during the 7 prosperous years, you have to gain as much grain as you can and store it in readiness for 7 years of drought and famine." And this is indeed what happened, and because of which, according to the Bible, Joseph rises to become the vizier of Egypt, the second in charge of Egypt. Now, you don't have to accept that the Bible stories are historically accurate, but it's quite clearly talking about a specific time frame in history, and all of the evidence seems to suggest that the Pharaoh that was on the throne at the time of Joseph was the father of Sobekneferu. As I said, his name was Amenemhet III. And what's so interesting is that there are various Arab stories from the early medieval period, from about the 9th, 10th century onwards, that were gained from much earlier Christian Coptic traditions of Egypt that expand this story of Joseph. And what it says is that he was involved with this engineering project of creating a canal between the Nile and the huge oasis known as the Fayum, which is about 60 miles to the southwest of Cairo. And that, not only did he create this canal, but he also was involved with creating a palace specifically for Pharaoh, what's described as Pharaoh's daughter. Now, I am certain that Pharaoh's daughter is Sobekneferu, and this was her palace actually in the Fayum, which was next to the temple of Sobek. Now, Sobek was the very important deity at this time, and not only was it very significant and almost becoming a part of a state religion, but it looks like Sobekneferu herself took it one stage further and tried to make Sobek into a monotheistic religion, because it was considered to be the oldest deity in Egypt. It was considered to be a form of the sun god Ra, who in his creator form was known as Atum. And it was believed that all the creation myths surrounding Sobek as Ra took place in the Fayum, that this was the original place of Zep Tepi, the original place of the ancestors. And they tried to create a religion, a monotheistic religion focused around Sobek at this time. And to do this, she created what is, according to Herodotus, the father of history and Greek tradition, who visited Egypt about 450 BC. They created this incredible temple complex known as the Egyptian labyrinth. And this is mentioned by various classical writers. And all the indications are that this was constructed so that priests from all over Egypt would come to the Pharaoh once a year to pay respects to the god Sobek as the ultimate god behind all other gods of Egypt. And this is something that I think that she was able to achieve. The only problem is that this was obviously going to piss off, sorry to swear, some other factions who
Okay,
quite clearly believed that their religions were more important. And I think that the most important religion here that opposed her was that of Heliopolis, the priests of Ra, the priests of Atum, who were who had a major influence on her brother, so that when her brother was out of the picture, their influence and power was suddenly lost to the priesthood of Sobek in the Fayum. And I think that they were the main people that eventually would come after her and want her dead, basically, for various reasons. And I think that once she believed that she'd done all she could in her reign and created this new dynasty, the 13th dynasty, that would continue on in her name and would continue to support the sovereignty of Egypt, that she just decided that the best thing that she could do was end her own life. And I think that she committed suicide, or something that she would have seen in terms of a ritual death, of quite literally walking into the afterlife. And of course, we see the same thing as happening with Cleopatra. Cleopatra also took her own life when she believed that she could no longer do what she needed to do for Egypt. And the whole story about Cleopatra using a snake to bite her, to poison her and to kill her is just a myth. Basically, the latest theories on how she died is that she probably took a cocktail of psychoactive substances, which would have quite literally allowed her to walk into death. And I think it was exactly the same thing that happened to Sobekneferu. And it may even be that for Cleopatra, Sobekneferu's story was an inspiration to her, and that that she in many ways was just repeating history.
So after her, after Sobekneferu, who took the throne? Let's say a
Well, the first
descendant of
two
hers.
kings, the first two kings of the 13th dynasty were, it seems, sons of her brother. Now, this is just pure speculation, but this is what has been suggested. So you might say to yourself, well, if she was involved with getting rid of her brother, maybe even involved in his death, why would his sons, accept her and follow in her footsteps? And there is no obvious answer other than to suggest that they were also her sons, and this has been suggested as well, or she was able to convince them that the path that their father was taking was the wrong one, and that she was working in the in the favor of Egypt itself, and that what their father was doing was wrong. But their names included that of Amenemhet, which shows that they were clearly a part of the previous dynasty. So they must have been strongly related to either Sobekneferu or to her brother, the king Amenemhet IV. And many of the kings of the 13th dynasty bore names that included Sobek. Their names were Sobek Hotep, which essentially means the servant, or the person that serves Sobek, basically. And so we also know that they deified Sobekneferu, they created a cult in her name, which appear to have continued on long after this dark period called the Second Intermediate Period. But what's also important to point out is that the 13th dynasty was not the only dynasty. Another one ran concurrently with it. This was the 14th dynasty. And this had kings that ruled from the northern part of the country in the Nile Delta. And from their names and from inscriptions, it's quite clear that this was a Canaanite dynasty. In other words, the incoming peoples had now taken over the northern part of the country and had created their own dynasty. So you had this so-called Canaanite dynasty in the north, you had this Egyptian dynasty in the south, and although they may have had battles to start with, it would seem as if eventually one accepted the other, with the northern Canaanite dynasty believing that the Egyptians were now so weak that they would never rise up against them. But they underestimated them, because what happened is that at the end of the 13th dynasty, they passed on the baton of sovereignty to the next dynasty, which was the 17th dynasty, who also had various kings that had the name Sobek in them. So they were quite clearly part of the same, tradition. And eventually, two brothers would rise up, whose names were Chamos and Amos, and they would create an army that would eventually defeat these the Hyksos kings. Chamos became the last king of the 17th dynasty, and Amos became the first king of the 18th dynasty. And as I said, they were able to create this brand new kingdom in Egypt, which allowed Egypt to prosper in such a way that it became the most important of all of the kingdoms in the whole of the Near East after that time, or certainly, for a good while.
So they seem to have had a slow but secure victory after many centuries, I guess.
Yeah, but as I said, without Sobekneferu, none of that would have happened. Or let's say, I can see no clear path for it ever to have happened, because the dynasties would not have been there. The country would have been taken over by the Canaanite dynasty in the north, the Hyksos, and I can't see any way back for the country.
Yeah, from what you were saying, I see a kind of she was there in a special transition moment in which if she hadn't acted, things would have gone very differently in Egypt. Probably it would have been invaded entirely by these Canaanites, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm curious. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm just saying. I mean, obviously, this all sounds very ruthless. Her killing her brother or being certainly involved with his death. But I'm afraid that with royal dynasties, whether you look at the Ptolemies, in Greco-Roman times, or the Caesars, in Rome, or indeed any other dynasty, this type of what they call infanticide, not infanticide, I've got the correct term now, but where brothers and sisters would be killed or whatever.
Frater something.
Yeah, you've got it. Yeah.
Or,
yeah. Is that it was going on all the time. And in the book, The First Female Pharaoh, I show that there are at least two instances within the 12th dynasty, her own dynasty, where it would seem that the ruling king was, that was tried to be killed by people from that very dynasty. So, in other words, this was going on even at her time. So, to suggest that she may have been involved with the death of her brother is not unusual.
Yeah, from fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure, but from shows, like Game of Thrones and stuff like that, we have been given a kind of, though fictional, a kind of new perspective on how these families and dynasties kind of work from the inside, because maybe we've studied the different I don't know, in Great Britain you study the different families that were in power, etc., and you get pretty interesting stories as well, with very complicated interrelationships between them. But I guess going back even further, it was even more ruthless. And we tend to look at history perhaps from a kind of higher vantage point. But when you go down to the ground, maybe I'm not saying that I approve of fraternicide or whatever,
Yeah, of
but
course.
maybe when you're in the thing making the decisions, it's like you see kind of maybe no other way. You
Yeah,
see, okay, they are going
exactly.
to kill him anyway. I might as well be kind of in control of what happens after. So I should intercede perhaps. And at the same time, you mentioned that it's probable that she was a little bit older than him, and that they might have even had children together. So it's a very different kind of family. The nucleus,
Dynamic.
the
Yeah,
family dynamic
yeah,
is very different
yeah,
than
yeah,
today.
yeah.
She might have even had some influence on these children that came after her. Uh,
I think so.
and in kind of raising them and kind of moving them a little bit more towards her religious ideas, because probably that's what there must have been something philosophical within her beliefs that made her act in this way of protecting the continuation of Egypt, or maybe it was Khem, right, at the time, whereas his brother was being perhaps a little bit controlled by another kind of
He was
sect that had
absolutely.
different intentions. So it's complex and complicated, but it's not outside of the realm of possibility for the times, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the Game of Thrones analogy is absolutely dead accurate. And I think what's important to realize is that for you to rule a kingdom like Egypt, you have to be ruthless. You cannot be a gentle, nice person, because you will be seen as weak. You must rule as like a lion, a roaring lion. And if you are not, then there are always going to be factions that will want to pull you down and want to destroy you and to exploit your weakness. And this is something that Sobekneferu had to get across. I mean, there's indications that that the deities that she particularly was interested in was Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess, because she saw this as a force of great strength. I mean, one of her names, involved the root word for Sekhmet, which is Sekhem, which means like divine power, almighty strength. And that's the way that you have to be presented. She was also shown as a sphinx, a huge, great sphinx in the northern part of the country where all these Canaanite people settled, as a symbol of how strong she was. And it had to be this way. But I mean, from all that I've read and from all I understand of her and her reign, is I think that she was probably a good person. What I mean by that is, in consideration to everybody else that was around, she was doing the right thing. And that she, that the ultimate purpose of a ruling dynasty, of a ruling pharaoh in Egypt, is that you've got to create a state of Maat, M-A-A-T, which means cosmic balance and harmony. Because the upper world, as above and so below, have to be exactly in harmony. And this is something that the pharaoh achieves through what they do, the way that they address everything within their reign. And that's the most important thing of all. And I think that this was the reason why she eventually did commit suicide, because she had achieved what she could for Egypt, for this balance of harmony, but she realized that she could not take it on any further. But this was now up to the next dynasty, the next generation, to do so. And that's what happened. But what's also interesting is that her reign would seem to have been suppressed. Her name would seem to have been ignored by king lists afterwards. Not all of them, I must add, but in certain of them. I mean, for instance, if you go to Abydos in southern Egypt, and you go through the temple of Seti there, the huge great temple. If you go out to the back towards the monument known as the Osirium, on the wall there is a picture of Seti I with his son Ramesses, the future Ramesses II. And Seti is showing him the cartouches, which are the oval shaped, things that contain the names of the kings, of all the different kings that have reigned before them. And what's so interesting is that you have Amenemhet III, you have Amenemhet IV, who is the brother of Sobekneferu, and then there's no kings whatsoever until Ahmuz, the first king of the 18th dynasty. They're all gone. Now, I can understand why they would not want the kings of this dark period, this dark age of history. Perhaps they just wanted to forget it. But why does this start with Sobekneferu? Why is her name, completely avoided? And the only conclusion that I can make is that they thought that she was responsible for creating this dark age. In other words, that even by the 19th dynasty, when Seti I and Ramesses reign, the whole story of history has been forgotten about. In other words, her role in it has been completely ignored. That she was seen as the cause of this dark age, as opposed to the person that was able to rectify the problem and allow Egypt to prosper during the New Kingdom period. I find this very interesting. And what we also know is that she was never buried in the pyramid that was intended for her. This was a pyramid at a place called Masguna, which is immediately to the south of Dashur, where you have the bent pyramid and the red pyramid of Sneferu. Just to the south of there, you had two pyramids that were being built for her and her brother, Amenemhet IV, and for Sobekneferu. The one for her brother would seem to have had a burial in it, but we don't know whether it was him because this had gone in antiquity. But her pyramid was never, ever used. So what this means is that she must have been buried in secret, probably by her closest followers. Whether she underwent the correct burial procedures, which would take anything up to 90 days, seems unclear. Where she was buried, what tomb, nobody knows. I suspect that she was buried in a tomb that was prepared for somebody else, and that it was commandeered at the last minute for this royal burial, the burial of a female pharaoh. And we have to look for this sometime. I think that it was probably somewhere in the area of the Fayum, probably on the northern Fayum area. And the reason I say that is because this area was seen by them as a place of the ancestors, because there are settlements there going back at least 7,000 to 8,000 years to the Neolithic period, including stone circles. And everywhere around, you'd have found the stone tools of these ancestors. And right in the midst of it is the strangest building in the whole of Egypt. And it's at a place called Kaza El Saga, and it's a megalithic temple made of these huge, great polygonal blocks. It's similar in design to the Valley Temple of Khafre at Giza, and also it's very similar to temples in Peru, places like Machu Picchu, Cuzco, and places like this. It has that same style of polygonal blocks. Megalithic blocks, basically. And although I'm pretty certain that she did not create it, I found two pieces of evidence from inscriptions that people have overlooked, suggesting that her name was connected with that building, and it was renovated during her reign. And I think that it was used by her. It's known as the Temple of the Crocodile, so it was unquestionably, if folklore is correct, a place of Sobek. And it seems to be connected with a very strange story as well, because it said that this temple was founded one day after a pharaoh was being chased by dogs, and they came to the edge of the lake, the great lake of the Fayum, and the king thought that he was going to die. And a crocodile then emerges from the water and says, "Climb on my back, and I will take you to safety." So the pharaoh goes on the back of the crocodile, and he puts him down somewhere else. I think the story is that it was on an island. There was an island in the lake, and as in honor of this crocodile, the Casa El Saga temple is built. Now, this is a very, very strange story, and it relates very strongly to the traditions connected with the deity called Sobek, because Sobek was considered to be the oldest deity in Egypt. He was seen to be a form of the sun god Ra. And what it was believed is that at night, when the sun set, that the sun would assume the form of the crocodile and swim from west to east in the waters, and then at dawn would rise up on the eastern banks, assume the form of the sun again, and rise up into the sky and repeat. And of course, this tradition is associated with the pharaohs and the death of the pharaohs and the journey that they have to take. In other words, that they also would have to become the crocodile god Sobek to rise up into the sky and achieve, to become a soul in the afterlife, basically. And this, I think, was very, very important to Sobekneferu. And I think that for this reason, I'm going to say that I'm pretty certain that her tomb will be found somewhere in the vicinity of the Casa El Saga megalithic temple.
Yeah, and the symbolism of the crocodile is very much connected to power and like reigning and kingdom, so it makes sense.
And water.
Yeah, exactly. To connect it with the sun as well.
Yeah, and the Nile, of course.
You mentioned, and this might be also connected. If you would give a little bit of if we could get into a little bit more this crocodile. I don't know if I should call it a cult, or this branch, let's say, of the Egyptian religion. You also mentioned at the start that she was known as the goddess of the seven stars, and I'm guessing this is connected to the Pleiades.
No, not the Pleiades.
Okay.
The seven stars involved the seven stars of Ursa Major. What we know as the Great Bear or the Big Dipper, or the Plough in England. And basically, the mother of Sobek is the hippopotamus goddess Neith, okay, a very, very ancient goddess of Egypt. And her son was Sobek, the crocodile god. And they were personified in the night sky as a joint sky figure of the hippopotamus with the crocodile on its back, made up of the stars of Draco, which we know today as the great dragon or serpent of the northern sky, but also Ursa Minor, in which today is Polaris, the pole star, and also the stars of Ursa Major. They figured into this as well. And if you look at the astronomical ceilings in tombs such as that of Seti I, a king of the 19th dynasty, you will see this hippopotamus with the crocodile on its back. And the best evidence for this is that this is this constellation made up of Draco, Ursa Minor, and also Ursa Major. And this would seem to have been very important to Sobekneferu, because both her pyramid at Mesguna and the Casa El Saga temple are aligned to a bright star, an orange star called El Tanan, which is the brightest star in Draco, that's considered to be the eye of Sobek. And this seems to be really significant. I mean, for instance, if you go to Mesguna, then the alignment towards El Tanan goes straight through the Red Pyramid of Sneferu from the fourth dynasty, and then hits the Great Pyramid. It's on a precise line. And I think that this is something that would have decided where her pyramid was, because she would have wanted to link not only with this place of the afterlife in the northern part of the sky associated with Sobek and his mother Neith, but also it would have connected her with the kings of the fourth dynasty, the builders of the Great Pyramid and the other pyramids on Giza, because it would seem as if her dynasty, the 12th dynasty, felt a close connection with those particular kings. There are a number of examples of alignments and trying to replicate the importance of this much earlier dynasty, which gives us the Great Sphinx, the Great Pyramid, and the second and third pyramids as well. The 12th dynasty, all the way down to Sobekneferu, seem to want to connect themselves in a spiritual manner with these ancestral kings.
That's interesting. The connection to Draco, since nowadays we well, I say we, I mean, it's in the new age, etc., or in this new kind of religion or mythology that's coming up in our current times. Draco is generally connected to kind of the dark side a little bit, and that they would be connecting to that. I don't know what do you see? What do you see about that?
Okay, which reminds me of your original question about the goddess of the seven stars, because what happens is that after her death, her Sobekneferu's reign is suppressed. So we know very little about her, and it wasn't until the 19th century, with the birth of Egyptology, that the early Egyptologists started to find reference to her within inscriptions on blocks of stone that were found in the Fayum, where the labyrinth was located. And a lot of speculation started to rise in books. Particularly, there was a German archaeologist by the name of Heinrich Brugsch, and he wrote extensively about Sobekneferu and basically suggested that she was the founder of a cult that continued after a time with these kings of the 13th dynasty, all being named Sobek. They were clearly following her in some way. They deified her and honored her. But then a more speculative writer on Egyptology took the matter further. His name was Gerald Massey. He was a writer historian from London. He wrote a series of books on ancient Egypt and how the ancient Egyptian religion related to other world religions, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia. And he wrote extensively about Sobekneferu. And what he said was he felt that she had revived a very ancient star cult in Egypt involving Sobek, the crocodile, and also the god Set. The god Set is also seen in the form of a crocodile. He's also related in some traditions with Sobek, seen to be the father of Sobek, and that she revived this cult, presumably in connection with the labyrinth, and that it continued on, and that this cult therefore continues on all the way through to the modern era. This is basically what Gerald Massey was trying to say. And he also showed that the mother of Sobek, the hippopotamus goddess, he referred to continually as the goddess of the seven stars, repeatedly in his books. Now, it would seem as if there was a Irish writer who was reading Gerald Massey's works at this time and thought, this is a great idea for a book. And that writer was Bram Stoker, who a few years earlier had written and had published a book called Dracula, as we know. And in 1903, his Egyptian novel was published, and that was The Jewel of Seven Stars. And the antagonist in it is a Egyptian female pharaoh who he calls Queen Tera, T-E-R-A. And her tomb is found, it's brought back to Britain. The Egyptologist who finds them has this compulsion to raise her from the dead, and eventually this female pharaoh starts to take over the body of his daughter, his 18-year-old daughter, Margaret. And the end of the book is quite dramatic, quite horrific. And after the book was published, his author, Bram Stoker's publisher, said to him, look, you've got to change this for future editions because this is so shocking to the post-Victorian audience. They can't handle it, and so he did. He changed it so that at the end of the book, everybody lives happily ever after and it's all nicey, but that wasn't the original ending to this book. And obviously, if people want to read this book, I'd strongly suggest they find the original version of it. But what's so important about Bram Stoker's novel is that it becomes the role model for every horror film where an Egyptian royal female, either a queen, a princess, or a pharaoh, rises from the dead and creates havoc in the modern world. Of course, the latest version of this story was in the 2017 film The Mummy, starring Tom Cruise. And that was based on Bram Stoker's book, even though it's not acknowledged, but it was. There's no question about that. But there are various other films all the way along which were all inspired by Bram Stoker's book. So in other words, we know Sobekneferu, but in a different guise. She may be given other names in films, but it is her. This is Sobekneferu. The other important thing is that in occult tradition, Sobekneferu is seen as the founder of this, what's known as the Typhonian or the Draconian tradition that permeates through to the modern day. There was an occultist named Kenneth Grant that wrote a series of books that basically talks about Sobekneferu as the founder, as the avatar of this Typhonian tradition, this incredibly ancient star cult of Egypt, involving Draco, involving the crocodile, involving Set, involving Sobek, and that this is something that is important to occultists today. The other thing is that a genealogist and historian by the name of Nicholas de Vere wrote books again saying that Sobekneferu was the founder of this royal dynasty of kings that permeated through ancient Egypt, through the Middle East, through into Europe, and became the Grail dynasty. That she was the founder of the Grail dynasty of kings, the so-called Dragon Kings or Dragon Dynasty. Now, I'm not saying this is correct, but what I'm saying is that this is the potency of this female monarch, the way that it has inspired people. And the other important thing is that, and this is where we get onto more paranormal things, is that one of the reasons why I became so interested in her, this was as far back as the 1980s, I know it's a long time ago, is because so many people were having dreams and visions to do with Sobekneferu. I thought, who is this woman? I need to know more about her. Whereas obviously we have other female pharaohs, like, as we said, Cleopatra, Nefertiti, Hatshepsut. People don't have the same type of visions about them, or not in the same manner, at least. Whereas with Sobekneferu, it's almost like she wants her story to be told. And the book that I have written is the first ever biography of her, and obviously I would encourage people clearly to find out more about her, but also to look at this from a female perspective, the incredible achievement that this woman has done for women. And, that women need to look at this story as a story of inspiration. And I see your cat now.
He's been trying to get into the picture for like half an hour already, and I'm stopping her with my finger. But yeah, oh yeah. So when you were talking about her, something that came to my attention. In the name, it kind of sounds like Nosferatu, and then you mentioned Bram Stoker with Dracula, and that made a lot of sense as well.
Well, that's a very interesting point, and
Yeah.
I'll have to give that some thought. I think. I mean, I wrote all about the origins of the word Nosferatu in a book of mine called Second Coming many moons ago, and I'll have to look that up where that word actually comes to. I think, if I remember rightly, it is Romanian. And I think that it refers to a type of spirit that rises from the dead. I mean, I don't quote me on this, but I will look up and see what I wrote in my own book. But I know that I did look into that, the origins of that particular term.
And yeah, I bring it up because it had come up in my mind before even you mentioned the Bram Stoker thing, and when you mentioned it, it was, oh, the vampire thing seems to be present here.
Yeah,
And
that's interesting.
yeah, and the connection between Draco and Dracula, that's also, I had never thought about it. And
Well,
so
yeah, of course. I mean, you know, the name Dracula does come from Draco or Drac, which is the root of the word dragon in various languages, European languages.
yeah, yeah, and therefore the connection to the fear that he brought up in people. And
Yeah,
you mentioned so kind of her influence into the occult going even all the way up till present day, probably in ways that we don't even realize. So you mentioned Kenneth Grant. I don't know
yeah,
much about him, but I see in what you were saying that there seems to be so from talking with other people, I know that there's this current of mysticism that tends to go underground, and every now and then comes back, and it's more connected to nature and to kind of our original spirituality, to put it some way. And this seems that maybe it might be connected to that, and so um, in in some periods her knowledge or the the branch of the knowledge, or the line of knowledge that she's representing, maybe has to go underground, and nowadays every now and then I mean comes back up, and so I don't know, do you think there's something like that going on?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like her spirit has been, you know, trying to get through for a long time, as if she herself wants her story to be written and to, you know, return in some way, and rightfully so. I mean, as I said, if she was buried in secret, the chances are that she did not undergo the same type of funerary rites which other kings would themselves have undergone. You know, because these had to be done in specific temples. I mean, what we call today the Valley Temple, rituals would have been done, and then the mortuary temple. But then, of course, they would have been taken inside their tomb or pyramid and buried, and you know, obviously with other rituals going on. Did this take place for Sobekneferu? The chances are, I think the answer is going to be no. So, in other words, it could well be that her soul is in some way in limbo, you know, between this world and the afterlife, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, people see her in dreams and in visions where she appears to them. And I mean, some of these are quite dramatic. I mean, and involve things like poltergeist activity, you know, quite heavy stuff. I mean, some of it is quite clearly based on fantasy, or perhaps even the role that she plays in films, or in Bram Stoker's The Jewel of Seven Stars. But it's all mixed together. It's clearly her. It's clearly her. There's no question about that. And you know, I'd like to think that obviously the book I've written, you know, might have been inspired by her existence in some way. You know, I mean, her continued existence. I mean,
And
often when I was writing the book late at night, you know, I would almost feel this presence, you know, somewhere behind me, sort of like, you know, giving me thoughts and ideas which I hadn't, you know, previously considered, and thinking, oh my God, what if this? What if that? And I'd like to think there's a possibility that they were coming from her.
do you go a little bit into this in the book, this kind of occult side of her story?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
obviously only at the end, though. I mean, the book itself is written in a scholarly manner, but in the last couple of chapters, yes, I sum up
Mm.
the influence in Victorian times, the influence obviously with Kenneth Grant and Nicholas de Vere. And I mean, she's even got her own feast day, you know, now. If you look on the internet, it's out there, which is July the 23rd. Which is a date that a lot of people see in connection with ancient Egypt, with Sirius, with you know, the dog days of the Nile inundation. Um, yeah, so it's a very good day for her to have her own feast, if you like. So yeah, so I go into that. The other important thing is that in Bram Stoker's novel, The Jewel of Seven Stars, the daughter of the Egyptologist who gets essentially possessed by Queen Tira, she is almost certainly modelled on a woman occultist of the late 19th, early 20th century by the name of Florence Farr. Now, she was a prominent member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, and she would go into the British Museum and the British Library and connect with some of the items. Well, she started connecting with this tomb of an Egyptian female, what she saw as a female, and that this female started to appear to her in dreams and visions, and she referred to it as the Egyptian contact. Okay, the Egyptian contact, and it was giving instructions on how she should build this new magical order, which she did, and she called it the Sphere. And this became like an inner order of the Golden Dawn. The only problem is that the people that were outside of this inner order, but also members of the Golden Dawn, did not trust what was going on. They did not like what was happening. They even said that it was evil. And what I think happened is that what was going on in the Golden Dawn at this time reached the ears of Bram Stoker, and that he based the character of Margaret, the 18-year-old daughter of the Egyptologist that finds the Queen Tira's tomb, actually on Florence Farr. And I show how this is almost certainly so again within the book, basically. I mean, I did have a much longer section on this, but I had to take it out because I ran out of space. But it is a very, very interesting story.
Yeah, maybe you can publish it as an article on your website sometime.
Yeah, I mean, every time I do a book, if a book is 120,000 words, I will probably have written something like 170,000 words, and I have to cut things out always. So there's always chapters that never reach a book.
And did you ever think about, for example, getting in contact with what's it called, a medium or something like that, and see if you can reach the spirit of Sobekneferu?
Well, this has happened on many occasions. I work with psychics. I mean, some of my best friends are, incredibly intuitive psychic people. I mean, they don't advertise it. They don't do it for profit. They don't do it for money. They're just my friends. And of course, they have seen glimpses of her in the past, and I'm sure many other people, will have similar experiences. I know of various people that have had, alleged encounters with her after setting up an altar in her name. So it happens. So, I mean, if people want to try it, then please do and let me know what happens.
And the other thing I was thinking, I haven't watched it completely, but there's this show based on a comic book that's called Moon Knight.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and I know there's a crocodile god or goddess in the show.
There
So
is. Yeah, that's
maybe
Sobek.
there's
Yeah.
maybe there's something there that symbolically can link to all of this.
I'd have thought so. I mean, I watched some of Moon Knight, and from what I hear from others, yeah, I mean, the story can easily develop into one that's connected with Sobekneferu, no question at all. I mean, whether it will or not, particularly as it's on, it's a Disney, isn't it? A Disney, if I remember
Yeah,
rightly.
Marvel, and I guess Marvel is Disney. Yeah.
But it's unlikely that it's going to bear fruit to a lot of really cool stories. I think probably the comics might be a better place to look for them, or the graphic novels.
Yeah, it's an interesting time we're living with all these adaptations of old books and adaptations of adaptations,
Yeah,
and yeah.
I mean, she does appear in the new Sherlock Holmes, an
Mm.
episode of that, where somebody tries to create almost like a false mummy of Sobekneferu. I talk about this in the book right at the end, when I'm reviewing, her in the modern day. It's the modern version where Dr. Watson is a female. There's a whole episode about her, and what's so interesting is that they give the backstory of Sobekneferu, and they get quite a lot right. I mean, they actually say that she was probably involved with the death of her brother, which I find interesting. But it's said that she herself was eventually murdered by the first kings of the 13th dynasty because they knew that she'd murdered their father. Well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that part of it. But whoever was the script writers for this certainly had done their homework and come up with their own thoughts and ideas, and they were very similar to what I put in the book. So that, I like that. I like the fact that others can come to similar conclusions.
Well, Andrew Collins, this has been very, very interesting. I'm guessing, from my intuition, what I see is that you've probably kind of uncovered something um, that's not perhaps that well known in pop culture today, or in mainstream culture today, and we will have to keep our eyes peeled and see what other references to her start coming up in the coming years, and see what influence or what relevance she's gonna, or the symbol of her might have in our times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from my own perspective, obviously, the book's the first female pharaoh. Sobekneferu got us 7 stars. We're also doing a tour to Egypt. I say we, and myself, Hugh Newman, and JJ Ainsworth of Megalithomania will be out there in November if people are interested. And we will be deliberately focusing on Sobekneferu, going out into the Fayum, going in four-wheel drives, going to the northern Fayum, going to the Khazar Saga temple. And of course, there'll be lots of discussions and relating to the quest for the discovery of her tomb. So, yeah, you've obviously got my screen on there.
Yeah, there we are.
Yes, Megalithomania next weekend. We're obviously off to Egypt we're going to Turkey twice in May and in September, and we're going to Egypt in November. So, but if people are interested in that, just come on to andrewcollins.com and just click the links and everything is there.
Yeah, you can
You're
find.
coming up to November 2023 there.
Yeah, there we go. You can find these parties in events on Andrew's website. Yeah. Well, I would really love to go to Egypt sometime. I hope we can meet in person and ask a lot
That
of
would be
questions
great.
together. Yeah.
That would be great.
All right. So yeah, everybody, you can find Andrew and all of his work on his website, andrewcollins.com. You can find his books and articles as well. And if you're interested in getting in contact with me, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is @atmanrafa, and yeah, on the on the YouTube channel, you'll find some meditation. I recently put one out, and yeah, I'm continuing with the podcast, getting close to number 90 already. Very happy for all this, and well, I'm also releasing some previously unreleased part two of some of the episodes, which are very, very good as well. And I'm really happy to be sharing all of this, having conversations with people like Andrew and with other very interesting authors and interesting thinkers and healers, magicians, etc., thinkers, philosophers, etc. Very, very interesting to be living in this time when we can get in contact with amazing people like yourself, and you know, somebody that's relatively unknown like myself, getting to this opportunity to have 1 hour with you or with people like Michael Cremo, etc., and learning about all of our ancient past and different interpretations or theories, and starting to ask ourselves new and even better questions all the time. And yeah, I'm also happy you can find here some of my music that I'm sharing as well for meditation or for relaxation and etc. And yeah, very happy to be sharing this adventure, this Mystic Times adventure with all of you guys. Thank you so much. You can also, I'm remembering now, you can join the Patreon if you would like to support the show. You're very much welcome. And well, what else? Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew Collins, for your time and for your openness to talk about all of this subject.
Brilliant. Thank you. Until next time.
All right. See you guys, and see you, Andrew. Bye bye.